A gold prospector. There's gold in them there hills.
That's terrible.
I know.
Even for you.
Even for me.
That's very good. I wouldn't remember all of that, but I hope you have a very good show, Pete. Thank you very much indeed for your company this morning. We've got through an awful lot this morning. Shall we do it all again tomorrow? Yes, let's do it all again tomorrow. So I'll be back tomorrow from 6 for another 4-hour marathon, but next up is Peter Cardwell. Don't go anywhere. This is Weekend Breakfast. Keep all of your messages coming in. He has a top show up next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I'll be here between now and 12:30, and there's loads to talk about this Saturday morning, and I want to ask you the question. I want to hear from you. Has Brexit worked for you? Because it's 5 years into this huge constitutional change. Has it worked for you? Is it working for you? Does Brexit work? Is it working how you thought it would work? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. There's a majority of voters backing under 30s migration in a Brexit reset. That's a new poll out today. Nigel Farage says he will properly deliver Brexit, and he's declared war on Kemi Badenoch as he holds a massive reform rally in her constituency. She's coming up to 100 days as Conservative Party leader. Have you even noticed that? And how has Brexit worked for you? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk to our debate desk. Joe Wheeler and Scarlett Maguire are here today. Also, is Starmer fudging the facts over his education? Was he really state educated? Tony Blair wants to talk about bringing in digital IDs to get tough on populism, he says. And Trump is threatening a trade war with the EU and Canada and Mexico. We'll get your calls, texts and tweets tweets. We'll talk about long-term sick people needing to look for jobs and an overhaul of benefits. The Attorney General's support for EU law undermining border reforms. Philip Kisley is coming up, one of our most popular guests. And we'll talk about navigating family conflicts and political differences with a practitioner of constructive conflict. Am I a practitioner of constructive conflict? I'm not sure. We'll talk to the chairman of Republicans Overseas and a former White House and senior State Department official as well about everything Trump is doing. He's blaming diversity policies after the air tragedy. He's also saying that he wants people to take their pronouns, they, them, he, his, etc., out of their email signatures for government emails. So let us know what you think about that, and indeed everything else. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. You can follow me at Peter Cardwell, and please do answer the question, how has Brexit worked for you? You can send me a voice note as well. Tech Up Dave will play them out. Keep them to less than a minute, please, so everybody has a fair share and time on the air. You can send those as you can send text messages via WhatsApp. You can also send me pick up the phone, make the call, and get your voice on the air on the same number, the main number, 0344 499 1000. Loads to talk about between now and 12:30. Stay with us here on Talk. Right then, well, fascinating to see in the I newspaper today that a majority of voters back under 30s migration in a Brexit reset. This is the British public backing closer relations with the EU 5 years after the UK left. Of course, the anniversary was yesterday, wanting the government to sign up to a new migration scheme for young people. This is a poll for the I paper by BMG Research, marking half a decade since Brexit took place, indicating more people would support rejoining the EU than want to stay out. Now, that conflicts with some of the other polling that we were talking to Professor Sir John Curtis about yesterday at a Friday Drive, as you may know, between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Most voters back the Prime Minister's decision to launch a reset of relations with Brussels. A quarter say it is moving too slowly. 36% of people want to quit the European Convention on Human Rights, up from 26% at the general election. 45% are opposed. Well, let's get the thoughts of Lance Foreman. He's a former Brexit MEP, he's a businessman as well, and Peter Wilding is the chairman of British Influence. Well, Lance, let's start with you. Has Brexit worked for you? Has it worked for this country, do you think? Is it everything that you thought it would be?
What I would say, Peter, is that it's a work in progress. You know, if you remember, leading up to the referendum, the Remain campaign was saying that this was going to be the worst thing that's ever going to happen to Britain. The economy would completely collapse, massive unemployment. You know, they threatened everything. The sun would, well, it's not shining today actually, and the grass wouldn't grow. It's just going to be a total catastrophe, and that just hasn't happened. In fact, our economy has performed. It hasn't performed well, but it's performed better than Germany, the biggest economy in the EU. So on the negative, that never really happened. But the Brexit campaigners were also saying this would be very good for the economy and it would be good for the future of Britain. And I would say that hasn't really happened yet either. But we have the opportunity for growth. We've sort of worked out how to unlock the door to leave the EU, but we just haven't left the room yet. So we're still faced with, you know, pretty much all of their regulations. We have done some positive things. We've joined the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which we couldn't have done in the EU, and that free trade agreement is pretty much as big as the EU itself. You know, if you take all the countries involved in their GDPs. Yesterday, we heard from Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump said that the EU has treated us very badly, and we're going to impose tariffs. Well, we're not in the EU anymore, so we have an opportunity to trade with our biggest. You know, the USA is actually our biggest trade partner, and there's some great opportunities if we seize them. We have to look at the opportunities and seize them if we want to do well with this.
Is this just about seizing opportunities, Peter Wilding? Peter is the chairman of British Influence. Is this just about things we haven't done yet, rather than what has happened so far within the last 5 years, Peter?
Because we, after the referendum, to
Peter Wilding, are you with us? I think it's not a great line. Let's try one more time. Peter, can you hear me? No, we haven't got Peter. We'll try and get him back. Peter Wilding is the chairman of British Influence. Lance, perhaps I can go back to you, because Nigel Farage has said in the last few days that he is the person to properly deliver Brexit. I mean, how much longer do you think politicians can actually say, look, it's really about what could be rather than what has been? And actually, is 5 years long enough to properly evaluate something, especially such a huge constitutional change?
Well, it's sad that we haven't really taken advantage of it. But I think one of the things we learnt was that there were so many complaints about EU regulations and the EU Commission, all the bureaucracy. When we left the EU, what we found was that our own civil service was, we were gold plating a lot of these regulations. We were just as bad ourselves. And what we need to do is we need to change the entire mindset. And that's something that's just not going to happen overnight. My hope is that what the Americans are now doing with DOGE and massively stripping back on regulations, which will free up the economy to grow. My hope is that we'll be watching them very closely and thinking, we should be doing this too, and we have the ability to do it now. I think there's something only like about 15% of UK businesses actually trade with the EU. Why should they face EU regulations, which they still do? There's no need for it. Small businesses should not be facing all the sort of EU rules. That's what makes us unproductive as a country. It's the massive bureaucracy. I know this.
Well, the Labour government has added a lot more bureaucracy and a lot more regulation within the last few months. Let me just give you a sense of what our viewers and listeners are saying. Sean in Gloucester says, how on earth can Brexit be a success when the vast majority of those in power never wanted it and are so against it? They've deliberately scuppered it to prove that people were wrong. And they knew better all along. They do well to remember who pays their wages and votes them in. Sean in Newton Abbot in Devon says, with reference to Brexit, I voted out and I would vote out again tomorrow. I will vote out again next year. I will always vote out. Yep, everyone keeps missing the point. Brexit would work. It's not that it's not working, it's the people behind it not implementing it correctly. Had it to be done by Brexiteers who actually wanted to leave, not people like Labour and the Tories who actually didn't, then it would have worked. In short, put someone in charge who actually wants to leave, and then we'll get the results they need. Peter Wilding, we've established contact by phone. I want to make sure you have your say, Peter. Is this a sense of perhaps the opportunities not being realised?
Thanks very much for waiting for me. We had two types of Brexit we could have chosen after the referendum. You might remember the hard Brexit option and the soft Brexit option. We had a choice then, and we chose the toughest option, the hard Brexit, where we were out of the single market and the customs union. That meant the onus was on Britain to choose a way forward, and we've tried all three. There were three Brexit, essentially. The Liz Truss Brexit to turn the UK into a Singapore-on-Thames, that failed. The Boris Johnson Brexit, which was basically a nationalist Brexit, levelling up, pull up the barriers. And finally, there was the Theresa May option, which was trying to make a deal which minimised the damage. So we've tried everything. And the problem we have is we're stuck with a system which makes Britain poorer, weaker, and smaller. Poorer, as everybody knows, because of the trade problems. Weaker because, the way we show power in the world is to sit on the top tables of great international institutions. We're out of it. And smaller because Northern Ireland is part of the EU economy. So this is always up, a bad deal. There's no way of getting it better, and we are just effectively in a hard Brexit doom loop at the moment.
But surely there are opportunities that we wouldn't have had previously in regard to the pandemic, in regard to trade with America, in regard to trade with other countries as well, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that just wouldn't have happened had we remained within the EU, Peter.
True, but it's like saying, we're going into a footy match, we're going to be 5-0 down at the start, and let's have this, one goal back. Of course, there are minor opportunities, but they are not outweighed by what we have sacrificed by being part of the biggest single market in the world and the power.
We're still trading with the EU, though, aren't we? I mean, it's not as if they've cut themselves off completely.
Well, plain that we are 15% down. We've lost £100 billion worth of trade each year. That costs each and every one of us a lot of money, because that's 40 billion tax take, which has just been thrown away. So yes, there are bits which are good, but the overall picture is bad. I mean, small business have been crucified. People can't, the cost of sending packages to Europe. I mean, little tiny, little niggly things like that were not necessary. They have been imposed upon us, and they have prevented trade. So, that's the basic deal where we sit. We've been waiting. You mentioned two things here: the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 0.08% increase in trade.
Lance, we are poorer, we are weaker, and we are smaller, according to Peter Wilding. What do you make of what he has said?
Well, I completely disagree. I think people have also got to put Brexit into perspective. It is our entire economy is not just about Brexit and trade with the EU. And in fact, I remember, in the year before we left, there was a massive argument about the exit fee, this £39 billion we were going to have to pay to leave the EU. And then immediately we did leave, COVID came along, and we were spending £50 billion every month on furlough and getting people to stay at home. So, the costs of exiting, I think that, you have to put them into perspective. The opportunities are great now that we have our independence, and we have to take advantage of that. That's what people voted for. When people voted for Brexit, yes, they had, some people concerned about immigration, some about sovereignty, some about, regulations. But ultimately, what people voted for is change. They didn't like the way things were being done. They were threatened that this will be a disaster. Politicians from across the board said this is a huge mistake, and yet people defied that. They didn't like what the political class and the establishment were telling them. They wanted change, and I think you're seeing a very similar pattern in America now. People are now getting the change, and I think it's showing what is possible here. And it'll be, I think we'll be watching very, very closely to see what happens in the USA. It's a fast-growing economy. We have that opportunity too.
Peter, a final word from you, from Peter Wilding.
I agree with Lance. He's absolutely right. After people were crying for change, it was just the wrong change. The right change, as Lance was saying, would be to change the political establishment, to have new leaders with new ideas. Unfortunately, people were very disgusted by Labour Conservative.
Peter, we're struggling just a little bit with your line again. I'm sorry to cut you off, but listen, thank you. I think we got a sense of what you're saying there. But Peter Wilding, who is the chairman of British Influence, thank you for that. And Lance Foreman as well, former Brexit MEP and businessman. And Lance, thank you. And Peter, thank you. And Peter, thanks for sticking with us as well. We had a few problems with the line there. Barry's been in touch and says the Brexit we got was similar to a half divorce, where the parties still love each other but argue all the time. We should have had a clean break. We need to take back control over every aspect of government, says Barry. Amanda says no, Brexit never worked because it was never properly installed. The greatest worry today is how our school children are being brainwashed. Nigel Farage gives this country hope for the future in these dark and worrying Labour days. And Penny in Essex says, good morning, Peter the Great, she calls me. Regarding the EU, if we ever really leave, it might just work. Starmer is trying to get us completely back in, but they want us back to screw us for every single penny they can. Well, today we're asking the question, how has Brexit worked for you? Let me know your thoughts, just as Penny has, just as Amanda did, just as Barry did, just indeed as Lance and Peter did as well. I can see the calls coming in. We'll take some of those, and we'll talk to those on our debate desk today, who are Scarlett McGuire, and by popular demand, Joe Wheeler is back in the studio. So stay with us. They'll be with us in just a second, getting through all those stories, not just in regard to Brexit, but lots of others as well. Kemi Badenoch in her first 100 days, long-term sick people needing to look for jobs and a benefits overhaul, and whether Keir Starmer has fudging the facts over his education. Stay with us here on Talk.
mean, so the recall rate has been increasing, and it's been increasing month on month, quarter on quarter for quite some time. The reason that this number is so high, so significantly higher than the same quarter last year, is because of those early release schemes. We released a load of extra people early, who would have been released later on. They came out all in a bunch, and that's why this quarter has seen that significant increase in the number of recalls.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody for sticking with us this morning. There's loads to talk about in the next couple of hours. We've got our debate desk ready to go in a second, but I just want to bring you some wonderful news, and that is that Keith Siegel, who is one of the hostages who was taken by Hamas terrorists after 484 days, he has been released alongside two other men, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon. And Keith Siegel is the husband of a woman called Aviva Siegel, and you may remember that Aviva spoke so incredibly movingly to this programme. In fact, we did something we rarely do, which is we replayed the entire interview, and Keith was paraded by Hamas terrorists. You can see that on the screen now if you're watching. He is now back with his family, with Aviva. We hope to speak to Aviva, maybe not tomorrow, of course. We want to make sure that we give her time and space, but certainly over the next week or so I'd love to speak to Aviva and maybe even Keith as well and see how they're getting on. But just that is a happy ending to an absolutely horrendous ordeal, 484 days in those tunnels, being mistreated in such a horrendous way. It's just awful what's happening in the Middle East. We know that there are going to be more negotiations between Israel and Hamas. That's going to happen from Monday, and hopefully we can get a peaceful solution. We remember, of course, the hostages that are still there and the innocent Gazan civilians that are going through and have been going through such a horrendous time. On Brexit, lots of people getting in touch. How has Brexit worked for you? That's the question we're asking. Steve in Leeds has given me a shout on 0344 499 1000. And our debate desk panel are with us today, Joe Wheeler and Scarlett Maguire. They're going to listen along to and respond to what Steve has said. Steve, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you make of Brexit? Has it worked for you over the past 5 years?
Well, Peter, I'm a Brexiteer, yeah? But the point I make to my Remain friends is it doesn't matter whether it's worked or not, because if you actually want to return to the EU, you've got to look at how the EU is today. It's moving to the right. It's got massive problems with migration, massive problems with the carbon environment laws that they have. Would we actually want to rejoin the EU? Because it's basically more bankrupt than we are financially. And if we had to rejoin, we'd have to pay about 10 billion a year in fees to join. We haven't got $1 billion to pay pensioners. We've no money in the bank. We can't afford to rejoin in the first place. So,
but isn't it a bit really about rejoining? I mean, are there many people who really genuinely want to rejoin? Or maybe you think there are. Maybe you think that's the way that Keir Starmer might be moving, Steve?
Well, this under-30s moving about, what you've got to remember is a lot of migrants who go to these countries in Europe get a citizenship, and like us, young men in their 20s. What do you think is going to happen? This, to me, is just a way of the EU saying to all those migrants that Germany wants to get rid of and France wants to get rid of, if you're under 30 and you came here last year and we gave you citizenship, you know what? You can now go to Britain without having to get on a boat.
Well, listen, stay where we are for 1 second, Steve, because I want to bring in Scarlett Maguire, who's a former Labour advisor, and Joe Wheeler, who's political commentator and indeed meteorologist. Scarlett, tell us what you think of what Steve has said.
No, I think it's that we need the under 30s, I think it was really good for us. I mean, I speak as somebody whose son was an Erasmus person who, I mean, actually he didn't go to the EU, but the EU paid for him to go to Chile. It changed his life. I mean, and he also learned languages. I think that freedom of movement for the young, being able to work in France and in Germany and in Spain is fantastic. And they can be, I mean, what I can't understand is we say yes to the Kiwis, right? Yes to the Australians. We have that deal. Why can't we have it with EU? No, I don't think we're going to rejoin. I mean, I think nobody's talking about rejoining. What we're talking about is a closer relationship.
Joe?
Well, the point that was made there that things have changed since 2016, and they have. I totally agree with that. I think if we try to go back in, it's something we'd regret. Not least of all because we're only 5 years into Brexit, and that hasn't been long enough to sort out the finer details of even the complete package. I think I heard
like the French Revolution, it's too early to say.
Yeah, just a little bit like that. Unfortunately, I actually agree with Scarlett about the ability to move around, because obviously I lived abroad for almost 10 years, and my children had the opportunity and the benefits of living somewhere else, seeing a different culture, learning different languages, and I know one of them certainly would go back like a shot if she could. And in fact, my eldest, almost adopted son, he technically is living in Portugal at the moment, but he's not, because he's come back and he needs a visa,
right.
And that's going to get held up now. And you think that side of it is very, very difficult. And I do get the feeling as well, if we did try to go back into the EU, there'd be a degree of bad blood and a degree of them being very cock-a-hoop about the fact that we go crawling back.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Steve, what do you make of what Joe and Scarlett have said there?
Well, just a quick point on the under-30s. So basically what I get from what Joe and Scarlett are saying is all our talented, adventurous under-30-year-olds, we want to leave the country and go and benefit the countries they move to, while we import thousands of under-30s, certainly on boats, that don't add any benefit to the country. It's like a young brain drain. Why don't we encourage our under 30-year-olds who are talented?
Well, you can't force people to stay, can you? You can't just simply say you've got to stay, Steve.
If you create the environment where young people in this country can get a job, get a degree, get a house,
or perhaps not get a degree, perhaps just join a profession or a trade where they're going to make money and do well.
Because in this country, if you're under 30 and you've left comprehensive school without a degree, you basically your life's over.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think there are a lot of good trades that people can go into, a lot of good apprenticeships. But Steve, good thoughts there. Thanks very much indeed for them, and thanks to Graham and Bushy, who says people who voted for Labour and change at the last election, but Starmer didn't like the change that people voted for with Brexit. Thank you to Dave in Bristol as well. He says Wilding, Peter Wilding, who we've heard from just before the break there, is one of those who have never accepted democracy. He's an EU fanatic. This is Soviet nonsense, and is one of those who support the unelected Soviet-style organisation who have continued taking every opportunity to punish us for daring to leave. Above all, we got our vote back, and Wilding would like to take it away from us again. I don't think he would, Dave, to be honest. I'm not sure that's what he was saying, but thank you. Sean says, whenever I listen to a Remainer or a loony lefty, it makes me absolutely incandescent. I am an intelligent middle-aged man. I ran my own business for many years. So who are these people to tell me and the millions like me we don't know what anything is, and that we're wrong? They're the problem, not the majority of us read the room. Well, I do think people did know what they were voting for. I don't like that suggestion that people didn't know. Jonathan is in Berlin and wants to talk to us about rejoining the EU. Let's hear a voice note from him.
Good morning, Peter. This is Jonathan in Berlin, Germany. I'm actually very surprised that many of the British people want to rejoin this failing European Union. One only has to look at the German economy, which many economists now say is in irreversible decline because of their crazy net zero policies and their migration policies. The British are lucky to be free from the rules and regulations of the EU that do nothing but stifle innovation. I'd never rejoin. I hope that Germany actually leaves.
Well, that's a very interesting perspective from Jonathan. I don't think it's one I've heard before, actually. What do you make of it, Scarlett? Especially when you think about the fact that, I mean, the EU has changed. These big powers, Germany's changed, France has changed. If we were to rejoin, I'm not saying we should for a second, but were that to happen or even be considered, it's a different EU now, isn't it?
It's a different EU, and we certainly couldn't go in with the incredible deal that we had, there is absolutely no question that it would be very difficult. Frankly, rejoining is not on the cards. I mean, it's just ridiculous to even discuss it. What is on the cards is getting a much better deal, right? I mean, actually, Keir Starmer doesn't like the under-30s. I mean, this government has said over and over again that they don't want it. But what they do want is a much better trade deal so that we have... I mean, I noticed that, you know, the first promise that was given to us was that if we left the EU, we'd have tariff-free trade with minimal bureaucracy. Well, you know, talk to the people who are trying to export to the EU. Yeah. It's just not there. And what we need is much better relations, and the other relations we need is security relations. It is ridiculous that we don't have that to and fro. I mean, you know, our criminals go to Europe, right? We want to know what happens to them. If you're going to stop the small boats, this isn't a British thing. This is happening.
Well, it's very much a European thing as well, and a French thing. I wonder, Joe, what you think our relationship with the EU should be now. What should be there that isn't there?
An awful lot of things. It really does seem that they don't like us very much at all. At the moment, if you want to buy a villa in Spain, I think the tax is something like 100%.
That's right. They're
which is absolute lunacy. I mean, their trades... tourism mostly, and they kind of allow us to go on holiday, but you can't stay over 90 days, otherwise you've got to come back, and if you want to live there you're going to pay an absolute fortune. And I think...
Hold on, Joe, that's the rule for everybody outside the EU. We are now outside the EU. This isn't a punitive thing to Britain.
Do you just have to take a rough with a smooth?
Yeah, we're just saying we're not in the EU, and Spain doesn't want us and the Russians and the Chinese to be buying up places. I mean, that it's not about Britain, right? We've got to clear that. Is that it's about third countries, and we are now a third country.
I would agree with you. Also, your caller from Berlin, who said that Germany wants out, you know, they're being bankrupted by net zero, aren't we? I mean, I think at this stage, most of the UK is looking towards the States, going, Mr. Trump, could you please come and help us as well?
Well, we had a big debate on my drive time show yesterday, certainly about 10% of agricultural land being proposed by Steve Reid, the Environment Secretary, to be covered with solar panels. What do you make of that, Joe?
It's madness. You get one big hailstorm, yeah, and half of them break. You get the kind of winds that we had a couple of weeks ago, topping 100 miles per hour, and just that they hope that they stay in the ground. I mean, obviously, solar panels are absolutely brilliant in warm, sunny countries, apart from the fact they get covered in dust and sand. And there's also an extraordinary amount of water that's required to actually clean them off, and doubtless about 3 full-time jobs.
I have got solar panels on my house,
You've got solar panels on your house?
Saves me an awful lot of money in electricity. Do you have to clean them a lot? I never clean them.
You never clean your solar panels?
I haven't cleaned my ordinary windows, never mind solar panels.
They're up on the roof. I couldn't possibly get there.
Goodness me, were they expensive?
They were expensive.
But have they sort of paid for themselves over the years?
Well, it'll take 10 years. But
right.
yeah, I mean, it certainly lowers my electricity costs.
Okay.
But it also lowers the amount of stuff I take. I mean, you know, I don't rely on the grid as much as a lot of people. I mean, you know, that's what solar panels and wind farms are about. Is about renewable energy, which in the end will be much cheaper.
We've got some breaking news now on Talk, and that is that a second body has been found in the search for 2 missing sisters in Aberdeen, Eliza and Henrietta Husty. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Both aged 32 were last spotted on CCTV in the city's Market Street at Victoria Bridge at about 2:10 on Tuesday night. Tuesday the 7th of January, I should say. Around 9:05 last night, the body of a woman was recovered from the River Dee in Aberdeen. The woman is yet to be formally identified, but the sister's family has been told, says police, that a second body has been found in the search for 2 missing sisters in Aberdeen. If there's any development on that, of course, we will bring you right up to date with that here on Talk. We'll be back on the debate desk with Scarlett and Joe in just a minute. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Barry's been in touch and says, what is Scarlett talking about? We didn't have an incredible deal with the EU, that we were always subservient, they hated us and still do. John says, with the Tories then Ed Miliband, we have even worse net zero policies in the EU that are destroying our economy, says John. Lots of people got in touch about that yesterday on my drive show. If you want to talk about net zero, you give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. We're also asking today, how has Brexit worked for you? Thanks to Yule in Ballymena. Yule, I haven't heard from you in a while. Great to have your text. Whether you're on the Leave or Remain team, Brexit has been a disaster for Northern Ireland, he believes. Dan in Kent says, Remainer or Leaver, it doesn't matter anymore, because whatever you think of the EU, they ain't stupid. They can see a rise in reform in the polls like the rest of us. They probably wouldn't have us back anyway. Ian says, get the under-30s to work here first. Eddie says, Brexit hasn't worked because it hasn't been fully used to our advantage, because politicians don't want us to work, don't want it to work. And one more before we go back to the debate desk. Nicola in Norfolk. Good morning, Peter. Brexit has worked. It's given us sovereignty and control over what we do in this country. The problem is that the calibre of those who stand for election is woeful. For years they hid behind the EU, and now they're front and centre in terms of accountability. Many people totally undervalue and appreciate the importance of sovereignty. We'll keep your thoughts coming in. Answer the question for us about the question we're asking this morning about whether Brexit has worked for you. Patty has been in touch in regard to what Scarlett said. I want to get Scarlett's reaction to it, but let's hear from Patty first. A voice note, you can send these in same way you send a voice note to anybody else on WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000. This is what Patty has to say.
Morning, Peter. Regarding Scarlett Maguire, talking about kids not being able to travel, my granddaughter has just been accepted into Alicante University next year to work for a year or two on her course. So they can still go abroad. You can still get a visa to go and work abroad. So it's all just nonsense from the Remainers. It's terribly tedious and boring.
Terribly tedious and boring.
Yeah,
There we are.
I am.
Scarlett, there are opportunities to go abroad. There are some things, but they have been reduced.
I mean, it's tough actually, as you know, with your daughter. I mean, my son actually has a job in Brussels, and it's not for the EU. He's, if anything, a Lexiteer. But because he doesn't earn very much money, it was a real hassle. I mean, he'd been working there before Brexit. It was quite a hassle for him to get a visa so that he can be. And I think now, I mean, he now lives in London and he goes there for a week, a month. Yeah. So, and that just about works with the. It is quite difficult. I mean, there is, yes, you can do it, but it's not easy, and it just used to be easy, and it was backwards and forwards. I mean, I remember, you used to go into a restaurant in London and you'd say to the person who's serving, where are you from? And it was always from the UK. And quite often they were doing a master's or something. Yeah. And it was, you had really bright kids coming over, and a lot of them would stay.
Well, what's interesting as well is I know a Brazilian person who has been here for some years, who is in a situation where he's had to negotiate a pay rise, essentially, because he was under the threshold for the amount of money you need to stay in this country as a migrant. Now he's negotiated a pay rise to get it above that, but that was a very stressful time for him as well. But that is the nature of the immigration system in this country. Joe?
Haven't we also just started a new system where we need a type of visa even to go on holiday?
That's right.
It's about £7 or £8 per person. I mean, OK, you can say the cost is negligible on top of all the airfares and everything else. It's just the fact that you have to do it. You have to go on the computer, you have to apply for it. Yeah. It has to be online, and not everybody has access either to a computer or to a printer if you need to print it out.
Exactly.
And that just, it tweaks things a little bit higher, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just adds to the cost of living, certainly, especially if you want to go to various places on holiday.
And it's mutual. I mean, we demand visas from them, and actually, if you go to Canada, you have to buy a visa.
I just paid my $21 for my ESTA to going to America this year as well. $21.
100 and so.
Oh, did you get scammed though? Because you can often go through websites where you get scammed. I got scammed the last time. I got $70 the last time. So this is much more expensive than it was before. You got to go through the Homeland Security one. itself. We'll talk about this afterwards.
Right.
Joe, you have been looking into something for us about Keir Starmer being accused of fudging the facts over his education. Take us through this.
Yes, well, this makes me a little bit cross because... oh, no, I don't get very cross. I just bristle a bit. Maybe a second cup of tea.
Maybe a second cup of tea.
But having had enough children that I could get them to partner up and hold hands, we've been through just about every type of education known to mankind. And so this statement really made me quite angry. He said... This is Starmer. As far as I was concerned, I started school as a state boy and I finished as one too. No, you didn't, right? And we might have all overlooked that. It was one of his Labour donors who went to the same school as him, this is Reigate Grammar, and said pretending it was a state school was completely wrong. Now, it was when Sir Keir started, to be fair, but very shortly after that it became independent.
Became a fee-paying school.
That's right.
OK.
And the local authority said they would continue paying fees for children who were already there.
Right.
And so he benefited from that to continue his studies through into the sixth form, and this school is now charging up to £9,150 per term.
That's a lot of money.
Pupil.
So essentially, he started as... So he never paid anything extra than taxation
11 plus
for his 11 plus, went to a grammar school, straight in there. So, I mean, isn't he sort of telling the truth?
No, because he said, and I finished as one too.
OK.
I started as a state boy.
The state paid. I mean, he was a state school child. The state paid for him to go to school. And this happened, actually, there were quite a lot. I remember Peter Hain, I think, went to something like Putney Grammar School, and in the middle it changed to be private, and again he stayed on because the local authority agreed.
But isn't this something that a lot of politicians do, not just in the Labour Party but others as well, where they sort of say, you know, I'm prolier than thou, you know, I went to a state school and that makes me a better person, even though it probably wasn't even their choice which school they went to in the first place?
No, I mean, I think, you know, he went to Reigate Grammar School because he was bright. There's no question that his parents could not have kept him there had the state... I mean, he could only have gone to a school that was free because, I mean, there is no question that his parents were not very well off. But I think this whole thing about Sir Peter Lample saying, you know, this is wrong. I mean, this is a man who believes, Sir Peter Lample, who believes the best thing you can do for bright kids is to send them privately, whereas I believe, like Keir Starmer, that the best thing you can do for kids is to make schools better. And what's interesting is that in the cabinet, you know, you've got Wes Streeting, you've got Bridget Phillipson, you've got Darren Jones, all of whom went to bog standard comprehensive schools and then went on to Oxford. And actually, not that Oxford is where every child could or should go, but actually state schools can give you that opportunity.
And do you know when they do? When they're grammar schools, because I'm a big fan of grammar schools. Joe, what do you think?
So you like secondary moderns, because that's the other side.
Well, I was both comprehensively and grammar school educated. I was comprehensively educated for 3 years. I went to a grammar school for 4 years for GCSEs and A-level, so I know both systems and I know which worked for me.
You don't know the secondary modern. That's what I'm saying is, the thing about grammar schools is they cream off and then the rest of the kids, I mean, most...
We live in a selective society, Scarlett. Surely, if you're better academically...
So at 11, you're written off.
No,
right?
you're not written off. You're not written off. You're simply saying you are either more academic or less academic. And
at 11, you don't know.
Well,
I mean, that is the problem.
Do it at 14. I was selected at 14. The thing that I think as well is that we need to rebalance and change our entire attitude in this country. I had a plumber come into my flat the other day. He was there for 7 minutes and charged me £92, and I do not begrudge him that money. Okay, good for him. he fixed my sink. He's got a good job. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And we look down on people who are tradesmen and work in white vans, and we shouldn't, because those people, not everybody needs to go to university, not everybody needs to, you know, I have a friend who went to university, he's got a PhD, he earns far less than that plumber, for example. We need to reevaluate our thoughts on whether people are failures or not failures, and academically, you don't have to be an academic success to be a success.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you're a child who fails the 11 plus, you feel like a failure, and that's the problem, right? I mean, I know children that didn't go to where they hoped they would go, and they just felt a failure, and it took years to get over. And secondary moderns, which are now ridiculously called comprehensives, I went to a proper comprehensive. It was utterly brilliant. I then went to a private school and found how bad they can be. Only academically, the rest was fun. But actually, I just think that you cannot talk about a grammar without talking about the kids that don't.
Yeah, but it's also a question about what that other education should be. Joe, what's your perspective of this?
It's quite the reverse. I started at a grammar school that then became a comprehensive, and it was dreadful. And then I went to private school for the sixth form, and there I learned all the things that I knew that I hadn't learned earlier on when I was at the comprehensive school. So I was a little bit against the state system. As I say, I've got a lot of children. We've been through the independent schools, private schools, state schools, international schools. We've been through the whole kit and caboodle. And I have to say that I do believe the private schools offer so much more. It's not just in terms of extracurricular activity. There's something about the way that they teach in private schools, and obviously they don't have, I believe, this sorting out of lessons that teachers do in the state schools. My daughter, who was in Spain, qualified as a teacher here, taught for a short while and said never again.
Right.
But she taught in Spain and she loved it because she was free to put together the lessons herself. I think I'm right in saying that I could actually teach music in a private school, but I couldn't in a public school because I don't have a PGCE.
You're a jazz musician, aren't you?
No, no.
You do play the saxophone, though, don't you?
I do play the sax.
Right.
Yes.
What else do you play?
The tenor horn and the piano.
Wow. There we are.
Very good.
Woman of many talents. Right. We're going to go to a break now, but we'll learn more about. Scarlett, do you play any instruments?
No, I got grade 1 piano.
Grade 1 piano? I've got grade 2 piano, I'll have you know. I see your grade 1 and I race you to grade 2. We'll talk about Tony Blair and digital IDs, and also Trump's threatened trade war with the EU, with Joe and with Scarlett on the debate desk. We'll get your views as well. Stay with us here on Talk.
So the recall rate has been increasing, and it's been increasing month on month, quarter on quarter for quite some time. The reason that this number is so high, so significantly higher than the same quarter last year, is because of those early release schemes. We released a load of extra people early, who would have been released later on. They came out all in a bunch, and that's why this quarter has seen that significant increase in the number of recalls.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Harry in Horsham, who says the type of solar panels that Scarlett is talking about and are being less reliant on the grid is very different to those that pretty much everyone else has. They exported generated energy to the grid, not create a self-sufficient system, says Harry. Betty says the other caller is right a little bit earlier on. Anyone with talent can go and work in the EU like any country. The difference is it's not unlimited under 30s unemployment people from the EU. Caroline says, I now take all polls with a pinch of salt because no poll predicted reform would get 4.1 million voters last year. I don't believe the majority of this country would vote to go back to the EU. Politicians are feeling the opportunities that Brexit affords. Our hands are no longer tied with trade. Well, we're going to talk about Trump and trade in just a second, Caroline, so stay tuned for that. Tim in Southampton says the UK already has one of the highest proportion of wind generation, but our electricity costs are the highest in the developed world, 4 times higher than the US. How are renewables cheaper? And Jackie says, can you ask the panel what percentage of students used Erasmus before we left? Well, it was a small percentage, but Erasmus, I know, was a very, very good thing for the people who benefited from it. Let's talk about someone who certainly is pro-EU, and that is Tony Blair. He wants to bring in digital IDs to get tough on populism. He promised to be tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Now he's convinced technology will allow Sir Keir Starmer to be tough on populism and the causes of populism. Scarlett, what do you make of this?
Well, there are two things about this. I mean, one, we have to remember, Tony Blair's absolutely sold on AI, on everything digital. I mean, he thinks that is the answer to everything, with which I disagree. He also...
You disagree?
I think you have to look at it with some scepticism. I mean, he'd replace teachers with AI. He'd replace civil servants with. I mean, it's not going to be.
You can't do everything.
They can't do everything. And AI, like everything, we all know when computers go down, right? We need to think about how to use AI properly. So
I don't know about you, Scarlett, but I've started to receive quite a few emails that are clearly generated by AI, and they don't quite sort of feel right in some way. There's something about them. You just know they're not written by a human being.
Yet. I mean, and they will get better. And I mean, the real joke is actually at the moment that the techie people are complaining that AI is using their stuff. And they've been using our free stuff, journalists,
for a long time.
Journalists, authors, anything. But the other thing about Tony Blair is, remember, he tried to bring in ID cards and he failed.
Didn't work.
And this is what he wants. Now, whether this would work or not, I have a doubt. I mean, I never understood the fuss about ID cards because, I have a driving licence, I have a credit card, I carry everything on my phone.
What Tony Blair wants is a national digital ID system to rule out live facial recognition cameras to tackle illegal immigration, drive down crime and deal with benefit fraud. What do you think, Joe?
Well, first of all, I have to confess that Tony Blair is not my favourite person. I wouldn't actually trust him to pick out a bottle of wine for me.
I think he should be in prison in The Hague, but there we are.
Yes, I would agree with you there. And when he first started going on about digital IDs, I thought, no. And then, of course, we had this complete fiasco with the vaccine passports or whatever it was. Cost a fortune, didn't work. I visited a hospital, was told not to bleep my phone because they said you'll be pinged for the next 3 weeks just because you've been in a hospital. But more than that, where I live, which is a lovely sleepy town on the East Coast, they've just changed the car park behind the shopping centre where you have to put your registration number in. Then you can use coins or contactless to pay. But I can guarantee you'll have got a ticket before the pensioner in front of me has managed to do this, right?
Joe.
I cannot do... I'm so glad. It's one of the nice things about getting rid of my car, because I couldn't deal with ring something parking on my phone.
The problem is as well that there's a lot of fraud as well. There are people who go and stick those QR codes over them and cause. But I want to get to the point on populism here, Joe, because what Tony Blair has said, he said this in the Times today. What the populists do is they take a real grievance and they exploit it, but they often don't want to have a solution because solutions are much tougher than talking about problems. The grievance would be on immigration, that thing is out of control. The grievance would be on crime, that we're not doing enough about it. So you say, okay, here's what you do. Then you have a big political fight. the populist is forced to choose. You've got to create an agenda that the other side has to respond to. What do you make of that thinking from Tony Blair?
First of all, the word agenda. The agenda is his, not anybody else's, right? Immigration and crime are just sticks he's using to beat us with to accept digital ID, because I'm sorry, I cannot see it'll help. Are they going to put sort of digital ID machines down on the beaches? You know, are they going to kind of flash themselves in with facial recognition? I don't think so. So, no, I disagree 100%. I think that is just a particularly twisted way of getting us to agree to something that he wants.
It's a police state. I mean,
Yes.
I think it's really scary, actually, the thought. I mean, there's quite enough CCTV as it is, but the thought of facial recognition everywhere so that you can be picked up. And
also it does go wrong.
I was just about to say, and at the moment it's not very good, and it's not very, you know, the blacker your skin, the worse it is, right? I find it's not the world I want to live in.
And also, I mean, an awful lot of these things, maybe not the digital ID, but we have things in a wallet on our phone, and I often travel up and down to London by train. Often, by the time I get back to my base station, my phone's run out of charge, and they make me plug it up until it comes to life, so they can see the ticket before they let me through the barrier. It's not enough that I've passed through the barrier at this end, you know, and they make me sit there, and I suppose I should be carrying an extra power pack, but I don't want to carry anything.
No, I know what you mean. Well, that's about battery life as well. We're asking the question today about whether Brexit has worked for you. Let me know your thoughts on that, 0344 499 1000. But just before we let our debate desk doyens go, Joe and Scarlett, it's nearly 100 days, I think it's 100 days on Monday or Tuesday, when that Kemi Badenoch has been leader of the Conservative Party. Roaring success, Scarlett Maguire?
No, I mean, I think she's a sort of rather worn-out lettuce. It would help if when she did debate, she knew what she was talking about. I mean, this is the woman who says that the reason the Southport murderer did it was because he hated Britain. I mean, nowhere has that been said. I mean, the reason he did it seemed he had incredible rage and wanted to murder lots of people. It had nothing to do with the country. I mean,
well, he certainly, I mean, he had an Al-Qaeda training manual. I mean, there were certain elements there.
But over and over again they said he wasn't a terrorist, he had no ideology, right? This was a man who just wanted to murder. He'd wanted to do a school massacre that his father stopped him from. I just think the problem with Kemi is, you know, whenever, you know, the woman who thinks lunch is for wimps, I mean, give me a break.
Joe, your thoughts on Kemi Badenoch in her first 100 days?
She's got a nice voice.
Yes,
I haven't seen.
That's a little bit like when your son introduces the girlfriend and you say she's got very nice skin. You know, not a ringing endorsement there.
No, to be perfectly honest, I don't think she's been particularly prominent. Because obviously we've had reform going ahead in the polls, we've had everything that Keir Starmer's done. Keir Starmer's done. You know, we've had Trump being re-elected, and so I think she's managed to get off to quite a quiet start.
Does the quiet woman need to turn up the volume?
I think she does. Well, I mean, she wants to make some kind of impact, yes.
And I think the same thing will happen to the quiet man who turned up the volume. I think they'll get rid of her. I don't think she'll last until 29.
Thank you both very much indeed. Lots of love for both of you, including from Tony, who said, "I long suspected Jo Wheeler was sensible. Now we know she has beauty and brains in one package." Bravo. Well, no one tells me I've got beauty and brains. Listen, thank you. Thank you both very much indeed, Jo Wheeler and Scarlett Maguire, the mouse that roared at the end of that one. Thank you both very much. We'll talk about long-term sick people looking for jobs and a benefits overhaul next.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you so much for your company this Saturday morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. There's an awful lot to talk about. Long-term sick people will need to look for jobs and a benefits overhaul. That is the proposal from the Department of Work and Pensions. We'll ask a former advisor there, now head of social policy at the New Economics Foundation, what he thinks. We'll take your calls, texts and tweets as well in a few minutes' time. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about a majority of voters backing under 30s migration in a Brexit reset. That's a new polling, some new polling there. And the Attorney General's support for EU law undermining border reforms. That's the claim. We'll talk about how to navigate family conflicts and political differences. Have you had disputes at the table maybe about Brexit, which is 5 years old this weekend? Let us know your thoughts. We're asking the question today, how has Brexit worked for you? 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note. We've had some of those this morning. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Lots to talk about between now and 12:30. Stay with us here on Talk. And thank you to everybody who has contacted me on Twitter. Lots of people in favour of Jo Wheeler on the Common Sense as she was speaking on the debate desk there. A joy to hear Jo talking truths about the dreadful Tony Blair, says this person. Another person says, Scarlett talks about grammar schools. The Scarlett Maguire, who we had on a second ago, excluding some Erasmus. Was that only available to middle-class families like hers? How many kids from Cinque estates went to France and Spain on Erasmus? Well, I think it was a scheme, certainly that lots of middle-class children actually benefited from, and I'm not sure I totally agree with that person. I think there are a lot of people who didn't benefit from it for lots of different reasons. A question about whether he spelled Scarlett's surname incorrectly. No, it has 3 C's, believe it or not. And on jobs, Sue has been in touch as well. Says, you're so right, Peter, every job should be celebrated as worthwhile. So many kids are accruing debt for no purpose by going to university. We need plumbers, electricians, carpenters, shop staff, cleaners, waste collectors. No job should be looked down upon. Look who kept us going during lockdown. Sue, a lot of common sense spoken through that. Not everybody needs to go to university. I love books, I loved history, I love politics. I had a great time at university studying those, and that worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody. Lots of people do different things, and we should certainly evaluate and praise those in a very different way than I think we do already. I think we're far too snobby about people who go to university or people who don't go to university. It's not the be-all and the end-all. And also, as one of our texters was saying a second ago, it does saddle you with a huge amount of debt. And we look at the workforce and how the workforce is doing at the moment and the many, many problems that the workforce is going through. There are all sorts of serious problems, and one thing we know is that there are an awful lot of people who are not in the workforce, something like 9 million working age adults who are not in the workforce, and now there is a plan for long-term sick people to look for jobs in an overhaul of benefits. This story is the front page of the Times today. PM will curb 65 billion benefit bill with back to work push. Tom Pollard is head of social policy at the New Economics Foundation. Tom, is this going to work? Is this going to get people back to work? Is this going to bring growth? Is this going to help the economy? What do you think of this plan?
Yeah, morning, Peter.
Morning.
I think, undoubtedly the government has a huge challenge in that there are a large number of people out of work because of disability or poor health, and that number is projected to grow a lot over the kind of coming period. And they announced some plans back in the autumn around kind of improving employment support, and I think there was a lot to welcome in there, trying to shift away from a situation where people are fearful to engage with the job centre. I think the risk is the kind of plans being kind of mooted today will give a sense to ill and disabled people that they're kind of under risk again of losing benefits. And what we've seen over the last kind of 15, 20 years is lots of attempts to kind of tighten eligibility criteria, place greater demands on people who are on these benefits, and on the whole it hasn't really worked.
Well, we've also seen a huge increase in people getting benefits, and I'm not for a second am I arguing that people who are genuinely disabled, who cannot work, shouldn't get disability benefits. That is the mark of us as a society, and that we have a welfare state. We help people who can't help themselves. That's fine. I have no issue with that. But we're seeing statistics. We're seeing that that something like 7% of the benefits bill is fraudulent. There are many billions of pounds every year going to people who shouldn't get benefits. Surely some form of reassessment is actually not a bad idea, Tom.
Yeah, so I think there are undoubtedly problems with the assessment system, but often those problems are that people have a very poor experience of that process and come out of it feeling, people develop a bit of a siege mentality, if I'm honest. They engage with a system that feels quite predatory, that feels like it's very trying to catch them out. Fraud within the kind of disability benefit system isn't anywhere near a kind of 7% figure. I mean, for something like personal independence payment, it's down near 1%. I think we need to separate out those questions. So fraud is a separate issue, and of course we should deal with fraud. I don't think what we're talking about here is fraud. It's people who feel too unwell to work. And the question then is, how do you support those people closer to work? Right.
And I mean, we have seen work change dramatically in the last few years, Tom, haven't we? We've seen working from home. We've seen people who can work a little bit, maybe not all the time. I've said this before on air, one of my best friends has multiple sclerosis. Some days she wakes up, she can do a full day's work. Some days she wakes up, she can do maybe 2 hours or 3 hours. Other days she can't work at all because she feels dreadful. And I do think that there is a way for the system, and especially now because of hybrid working from home and flexible working, that can fit in with how people are feeling and what work people can do.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think what the system should be doing is making people feel kind of secure and confident in taking that step. Right? And like over the last sort of 10, 15 years, very little has been done to kind of proactively reach out to people who are in this position and offer them support. So we're presented with this false dichotomy that says, well, at the moment, the system writes people off, and the only way we can redress that is to kind of place stricter requirements on people. And my argument would be, well, first of all, I'd try genuinely reaching out to people and offering that support, because that hasn't really happened. And actually, when we've gone down a path of saying, well, you have to do this, and if you don't do it, you lose your benefit, what tends to happen is people get very anxious and they engage in a very cautious and compliant way. And that's not the path that leads people back into work. What we've seen time and time again is that the services that do this well do it on a voluntary basis, do it by understanding people and building a genuine, trusting relationship. And the reality is you can't do that by saying to people, if you don't turn up for this appointment, you're going to lose your benefits. I think it's just a massive misstep.
Tom, we'll return to this conversation in a second. Apologies for interrupting you. There's just a bit of breaking news, and that is that the Rafah border crossing has opened for patients. Sick and wounded Palestinian children have begun crossing Gaza's Rafah border to Egypt. Its first opening in nearly 9 months. That is a big development. We've seen Palestinian prisoners, we've seen Israeli hostages, including Keith Siegel, freed today. We will return to that story, but let's go back to Tom now. Apologies for that interruption there. Figures published this week showed that 2.4 million incapacity benefit claimants had no work conditions attached, up 50% in 5 years, Tom. These statistics are quite startling.
Yeah, so, we've seen some evidence published by the Department for Work and Pensions this week that said that some of that rise was kind of to be expected with demographic changes. We know that some of it comes on the back of the pandemic. So it's not kind of entirely unexplainable, but I agree that rise is concerning. The question is, do you reverse that rise by then placing stricter conditions on those people? And there isn't strong evidence to suggest that when it comes to people with health conditions that is an effective approach. So I guess what I'm arguing for is that the government has set out a plan around improving employment support. They need to really try to make that work, and the risk is that what's being kind of floated at the moment directly undermines that plan, because it creates this sense of caution and risk among people, which will make it harder for people to engage with that support. I mean, this is going to be a long-term project. You can't shortcut this. People have, become very cautious about returning to work because of the health conditions they experience, but also because of a benefit system that has kind of created a hostile environment for lots of people.
Why are we sicker?
That's going to take time to turn around.
Okay. Why are we sicker as a nation, Tom? What's happened? Is it the pandemic? Why is it that these numbers of people who are on all sorts of benefits have gone up to such a degree, do you think?
Yeah, so I think, there is evidence that there have been increases, particularly around things like mental health problems and, greater recognition and diagnosis of things like neurodiversity. So there's some of that going on. Some of it will undoubtedly be the aftermath of the pandemic. I think we still see people who are struggling to recover from that kind of shock to their lives and potentially to their employment. But some of it is that the that the benefit system has created this very difficult environment for people where people are either on a regular unemployment benefit, which is incredibly low.
I mean, some people would argue it's not a difficult environment because there are far more people on benefits. It's actually an easier environment because more and more people are on benefits. I know there are a number of factors there. I don't mean to be cruel to people who are on benefits, Tom, but I mean, there are a lot more people on benefits than there were 5 years ago.
Well, there are more people on disability related benefits, and we've seen a shift from more people being on other categories of benefits where they do have more conditions applied to them. And my argument would be that because that environment is difficult for people in terms of both the low rate of payment that people get on regular universal credit, but also the kind of strict requirements that come along with that. In part, that is what has driven lots of people to kind of seek protection from that. So we need to find a way to kind of make people feel confident about taking that step back into, trying to move towards work. And that is going to rely on kind of building trusting, supporting relationships with people. And the risk is that if you try and rush that, if you just say to someone, well, you have to do this, I think what you'll see is that people somewhat retrench and possibly become more unwell as a result. Like I just think you have to be very cautious about how you approach this. I think there are ways to make progress. There are services out there that do help people with even quite severe health conditions back into work. But it is about building trust and rapport with people, and I don't think that can be shortcutted.
And not shortcutting that. I mean, that is clearly a very, very big and complex thing for the Department of Work and Pensions can tackle. Do you think the department that you used to be part of, do you think it's fit for purpose in regard to that? Do you think it can actually deal with this in a grown-up way and get that benefits bill down and help people at the same time?
I think there was lots to welcome in the white paper that DWP put out in the autumn, and I think particularly within that a recognition that maybe the best place to do this work is at kind of a local level, joining up services at a local level that people maybe already trust, already engage with, and there is a big kind of program of devolution going on now in that space. I think that's right. I think the risk is that they get put under pressure by Treasury to achieve these savings much quicker, and that Treasury isn't satisfied with this kind of longer term plan to support people. And I think those two things will end up being in direct opposition. I think if you try and rush this by tightening eligibility, increasing expectations and requirements on people, that will cut directly against a program of reform which has talked about trying to build trust, trying to build genuine engagement. Unfortunately, those two things are, I think, in direct opposition.
Okay, Tom, thank you. That's Tom Pollard there. He's Head of Social Policy at the New Economics Foundation. He also used to work for the Department of Work and Pensions himself. He knows of what he speaks. Thank you to this person who says, my partner went to the job centre this week. She told the woman there she doesn't drive, but was offered lots of jobs where a licence was required. She had to repeat 5 times she doesn't drive because they don't listen to a word you say. They just mindlessly read off a screen in front of them. Jane says, perhaps all school leavers from every background need to be trained to build all these houses and infrastructure projects. I was not sure where they're going to find all these people in this parliamentary term. Jane, that's a really, really good point. Where are the builders? Where are the construction workers? Where are the materials as well, the concrete, the bricks to actually build all these homes? Russell from Leeds says it's a bit unfair to say how has Brexit been, as it hasn't been fully implemented or done correctly from Conservatives, as admitted by a lot of politicians. People criticise it, but it hasn't been done right, so it's not a fair question, says Russ. Well, we are asking the question, how has Brexit worked for you? A form of Brexit certainly happened about 5 years ago yesterday, so let us know what you think about it and whether it's been a success, how it's worked for you, how your life has changed and how the country has changed. Has it been for the better? Has it been for the worse? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll take some of your calls after the break. Stay with us here on Talk.
full-length runway in Britain was built in the 1940s. No progress in 80 years. A third runway could increase potential GDP by 0.43% by 2050.
Could a new runway be built that abides with carbon targets, concerns around noise pollution and concerns around air pollution?
That a third runway at Heathrow would unlock further growth, boost investment, increase exports and make the UK more open and more connected.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Loads of people getting in touch, including Jason in the Lake District, who says, I didn't go to university. I left school with 1 GCSE in English and went to work at British Steel on a youth training scheme. I then went to college on a day release and completed BTEC qualifications and then an HNC in exports. I then left at 28 and bought a bed and breakfast and worked my arse off for 23 years. I now have a great life in the Lakes. I'm proof that university isn't for everyone. A friend of the same age with a degree is now a gift shop manager in town. Unless you're going to be a teacher or a doctor in a specialist role, then don't waste your time with university. Get a trade and be the plumber that's always in demand, and you can pick and choose your work. Wise words from Jason there in the Lake District at his B&B. Andy Coleman has been in touch and says, of course streaming in education is right. It suits both the country and the individual. To suggest all individuals are suitable for all roles is simply stupid. Thank you, Andy. I totally agree. Leslie says, what Bridget Phillips and the Education Secretary together with the unions are going to doing, what are actually doing to education is appalling. To say a scientist cannot teach in school because they haven't been to teacher training college, that's ridiculous. Betty says, Peter, your driving licence is available digitally on your phone this year. I didn't know that. Both sides are dumb on ID. I think talking about both Joe and, well, maybe not Joe and Scarlett, just the two different sides of this debate, perhaps. If it's 100% ID for voting, then no issue for ID for every taxpayer or benefit taker has ID already. And you can actually get a free ID card as well for electoral, from the electoral office for voting, and that is something that is absolutely the case. Justin in Worcester says, good morning, Peter. Brexit has worked. Westminster has not. Short and to the point, and a good point as well. Jane says, the only winner of Kemi being the leader of the Conservatives is Nigel Farage, but unfortunately for the Conservative Party, they will not win the next election just because Labour are bad. Both parties are done and are never to be trusted again. And another person says, I was in the United States the week you were sick, Peter, and all the states are bringing in soft ID laws that target illegal immigrants. So no flights or services without a state ID or driving licence. But if you want to live in the hills off-grid, you can still have your own plastic driver's licence once you have an IRS number. 100% voter ID, Trump won 52%, says this person. And Mark in Southampton, more love for Joe Wheeler. Joe Wheeler is excellent. More Joe, please. Don't worry, there will be more Joe Wheeler coming. She will certainly be, in fact, I think she's back in 2 weeks' time. So, yes, you can see her there in action once again on the debate desk. Andrew in South Wales has given me a ring. We're asking the question today, how has Brexit worked for you? Let me ask you, Andrew, how has Brexit worked for you in South Wales? Has it been a success?
Hi, Pete. First of all, before I mention anything, I just want to say my heart goes out to all the families and friends about the missing sisters in Aberdeen.
It's a horrible story, isn't it? It's dreadful. Tragic.
Yeah, okay, but going back to the Brexit. Now, Brexit was a really good success for me. My girlfriend is dual Filipino and Australian. So obviously, you know, I wanted the UK to leave Britain. That's all my basis was. And it kind of leads to my bigger question, which was there were so many people who had such a passionate say about Brexit, and it never really affected them like it did me. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, for my girlfriend to be able to stay in the UK for 3 months, and then after leaving the EU, she could stay for 12 months. You know, that trumps everything else. And I got total understanding for people who dealt with Europe and who say, like, oh, you know, my business is going to suffer because we left Europe. You know, total sympathy, you know, about people like that. We are genuine people who voted because of our circumstances. But there's so much on this, and it got turned into, a kind of racist versus elitist thing, which is sparked up by the media. But a lot of people, they didn't even know how was changed them. There's no
you're right.
difference. Like I say to my friends, they say, oh yeah, we're going to go back into Brexit, and I'm like, why? And they go, oh, because the economy is wrecked. I say, yeah, but how's it affected you? You've had a pay rise. And it's this thing. No one really understands the EU. They couldn't even name you the 3 presidents.
Yeah, or tell you who their MEP was. That was always the question I asked Andrew. Who's your MEP? Very good points there from Andrew in South Wales. Thank you for that. Thank you to this person who says perhaps we could stop adding to the welfare bill by stopping the boats. How much has been spent on this since Labour came to power? They're giving out long-term contracts on this. We should clamp down on that as well. David in Worcestershire says the reason there is a problem with social security scroungers is Tom Pollard. Appeasement instead of stick and carrot, says David. Leslie says we should follow America. If you're able to work, then you have 26 weeks on unemployment and then it stops, says Leslie. Tony in Bristol has given me a ring as well, 0344 499 1000. Tony, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Well, Brexit never happened, did it really? I mean, even though we voted for it.
Well, so we did technically leave the EU, and there have been big changes that have been made, Tony.
Yeah, look, but practically, no. We were being run out of Brussels, basically. Most of our main policies to do with finance and trade, industry, was all being run by the European Commission. Now, it seems it's being run from Geneva, which is the headquarters of the World Economic Forum, Davos, because this current government just seemed to do, particularly Rachel Reeves, cannot jump around enough for the World Economic Forum and the Davos people, Klaus Schwab and the rest. And it was quite funny watching Trump talking to them. I don't know if you saw that last week.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Where they were all kind of smiling politely, but it's like there's 2 completely separate narratives there. Mm-hmm. They want globalization. They want all countries to be run by international big business, and Trump doesn't. So it'd be quite refreshing if we could have actually some real Brexit. I don't think we've seen anything really much yet.
Well, what should it be? What should it look like?
Well, what I'm saying is some sort of assertion from the City of London and who seem to really run the show, and from parties in Westminster, because both of the main parties, and this is one of the reasons why Reform is doing so well, are actually not for the nation state. They're globalist parties, and the real difference in politics these days seems not to be anything to do with left or right, but it's about, are you going to stick up for the nation state or are you going to be a globalist? And we've seen things like this hike or the relaxation of planning on farmland. This is all tied in with this family farm tax. They want to tax the families off the farms so that they've got all this lovely land that they can go and just build all over now. And this is a World Economic Forum agenda. This is exactly what they want, to bring in investment. And I don't even go for growth. I don't even think growth is necessarily a good thing. It's like a religion with Rachel Reeves, because it means...
Well, she hasn't achieved it, and doesn't look as if she's going to achieve it either, does she, Tony?
Well, I don't know. You're right. Yeah, so she's banging on about it, but is she ever going to get it? And do we want it anyway? So
well, I think we probably do want it. I mean, we want a growing economy. We want more money in the economy, don't we?
But that means that everything that we used to get for free, we now have to pay for. That's growth.
It's a bit more complicated than that, but Tony, I take your point, and I appreciate it. Tony, thanks very much. That's Tony in Bristol there. He's giving me a ring on 0344 499 1000, and you can certainly do that too. There's plenty of time between now and the end of the programme. Thank you to Tony for that. Let's take a few voice notes now. Let's start with Ashley, who wants to talk about Brexit, and we're asking the question today, how has Brexit worked for you? Let's get Ashley's perspective.
Let's be frank, Brexit never happened. It was stopped by the politicians, by the solicitors, by pretty much everyone. It's a farce. I mean, I voted for Remain. Won't hide that. However, a decision was made. We should have just gone with it. It's a trade agreement. It doesn't mean we're not in Europe. It just means we have a little bit more difficulty until it gets sorted out. But we've got a compromise which doesn't really work. You're either in or you're out, and we are neither. And we are fighting ourselves on this, and everyone else is looking at it and laughing.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Let's hear from Eve from Essex, another voice note. You can send these in 0344 499 1000, just how you send a voice note to anybody else. Eve in Essex, also a perspective on Brexit. Let's hear what Eve has to say.
Hello, Peter. About Brexit, well, we voted for control of our borders and our laws in the last 5 elections, plus Brexit, and we still haven't got control of our laws or our borders. So we've been betrayed by both Conservatives and Labour. And I don't believe Brexit will actually be delivered until we get a Reform Party in. It'll be especially betrayed by Boris because he had an 80-seat majority and he did nothing with it. Yes, so we've been completely betrayed and it's not been delivered yet, but it will be a success the moment we do use the benefit of it. Thank you. Bye.
Eve, thank you for your perspective. Let's hear from Jacqueline, also in the EU.
If anyone is under the illusion that it's all about control with the EU, ask them this. Why do we have trade deals with everyone around the world, but we don't have to take on their laws? We have trade deals with America. They don't interfere in our laws or our courts. So why are the European Union doing that?
Jacqueline, you make a lot of good points. We're still waiting for that proper full trade deal with America. Obviously, the tariffs issue is a big one. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the programme. Donald Trump, the new president, the old president and the new president, current president, of course, talking about Canada and Mexico and the EU in regard to tariffs as well. Thanks to Connor, who sent me a WhatsApp message to say, I agree, we need to stop the migrants coming in on the boats, spending over £1 million a day to house them and actually help the country, i.e. Brexit, with farmers being at risk. We really need to sort the world out. Well, there's plenty that Philip Kisley is going to tell us about sorting the world out, not just about Brexit, but also about the Attorney General. This is really interesting. This guy, Richard Hermer, a lot more scrutiny needs to be put on him. He's a very, very powerful figure within the government. Most people haven't heard of him, Lord Hermer. He has support for EU law. He is saying that we should be signed up and continue to be signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights. We'll talk to Philip Kisley about that. We'll also talk about navigating family conflicts and political differences. How do you do it? I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000, especially intergenerational ones as well. Sometimes there are people maybe a little bit older who think things differently to people younger. We'll also hear some more voice notes as well. Keep those coming in. 0344 499 1000, and we'll reflect on the Middle East. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
Well, I just want to show you a lovely piece of video, and for people who are listening on the radio, I will narrate it for you now. Offer Calderon is one of the 3 people who has been released today, thankfully, after 484 days of captivity, of being held hostage by Hamas terrorists, and he is part of a cycling group. And we're going to show you in just a second the cycling group and his cyclist friends who welcomed him back with Israeli flags. There are 3 hostages released today. Yarden Bibas, whose children are still in captivity, still being held hostage by Hamas terrorists. Horrendous. Offer Calderon and indeed Keith Siegel. And now we can see on the screen, it's just a lovely video of Offer Calderon and he's been released. He's with some Israeli soldiers and his lovely friends there from his cycling group, all in their cycling gear, are shouting to him and showing their solidarity with him, and it's all marvellous. He's got to get into a sort of vehicle with the military and so on outside the hospital, but his cycling friends are there, and that is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. We know that those 3 Israeli hostages have been freed. There are about 65 still in captivity, still being held by Hamas terrorists, but we know that those 3 people and others, of course, we spoke to Ashley Bakshi yesterday, who is the cousin of Agam Berger, who was released, a brave, very brave Israeli soldier. We know that many Palestinian prisoners have been released as a result of this deal. We know as well that the Rafah crossing into Egypt is open so that many of the innocent civilians from Gaza can get proper medical treatment by going across the border into Egypt. Things are getting better in the Middle East, and it's about time, 16 months after the horrendous terrorist attacks by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October 2023, of course. Let's get a couple more voice notes from people. I want to speak to Philip Kisley from the New Culture Forum. He's one of our very popular guests in just a second about all things Brexit and polling, and indeed about this Richard Hermer character who is the Attorney General. But first of all, let's hear from Kelvin, who has sent us a voice note. You can do this too, 0344 499 1000, on sickness benefits. This is what Kelvin has to say.
Morning, Peter. Regarding people who are disabled and got disabilities, I'd like to know where their human rights are, because they're forcing people with disabilities back into work, taking money off people who are needing this money, but they're quite happy to pay migrants £650 a week to stay in a posh hotel, which works out to £2,400 a month, and people like me get about £900 a month. It's totally unforgivable. Human rights should be for everybody, shouldn't it? Not just for migrants.
Calvin, I think that's a fair point, and fair is the word, fairness is the point. I have no problem with people who are genuinely unwell getting taxpayers' money. That's what we should do as a society. We should support those people, but people who haven't contributed at all, or people who are swinging the lead, or people who are falsely claiming benefits, well, they shouldn't get them. Let's talk, let's hear now another voice note from Nick. This is on Tony Blair. Tony Blair today talking about the Times and digital ID. This is Nick's perspective on Tony Blair.
Good morning, Peter. It's Nick Moore from Loughborough. Tony Blair's trope on getting tough on populism is just proven that the man is the personification of evil. What he means by this is populism is the people wanting the elected officials to work for them. Tony Blair is the antithesis of this. He believes in the liberal elite, the global liberal elite, ordering the people around. The man is a disgrace, and as you have occasionally alluded to, he should be in The Hague. Nice to see you back, Peter.
Thanks, Nick. A lot of sense spoken there. Appreciate that. I'm sure Tony Blair would deny being evil. I don't know if I even need to say that, but there we are. Thank you to Nick for your opinion there, and also to Kelvin and anybody else who wants to get a voice note in. We've got about 45 minutes left of the programme, and do let us know your thoughts on anything that you want to talk to us about. 0344 499 1000. We're asking the question today: how has Brexit worked for you? And there's some polling showing that a majority of voters back under 30s migration and a Brexit reset. Let's talk to Philip Kisley, who's a senior fellow of the New Culture Forum. Philip, great to have you back in the programme. What do you make of this research and polling?
Hi, Peter. First of all, it's great to talk to you.
I don't think it's really about Brexit, and I don't really think it's about the EU either. I think it's not about what happened 10 years ago. I think it's about what's happening now, because what people are really concerned about is the idea of leaving Keir Starmer's Britain. That's the one thing that comes out of this, isn't it? We want to be able to go somewhere else. We don't want all of the so-called human rights apparatus that comes along with the EU. We don't want any of the ECHR stuff. We just want the ability to leave. So I think there's something there which speaks very clearly to the now, to the present, and I don't think it really has anything to do with Brexit. I think it's one of these things. I think is a totem, isn't it? It's a symbol which people can kind of either dance around or talk about. And I think there are other things as well. I think there's a real crisis in democracy.
I agree with you, and let's get into that in just a second. But just on the Brexit point, I just have one more question, which is, I mean, is it fair to say, sorry, I don't want to get all philosophical here, Philip, but I can't get a bit philosophical with you. Who can I get a bit philosophical with? I mean, does Brexit just mean different things to different people? Is it the same thing to everybody?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it does mean different things to different people. And one of the things that Brexit is really about, it's about emotion. You know, and that's right in lots of ways. You know, I was an ardent Brexiteer, still am. I voted essentially for the keys to the front door. That's what I wanted. Philosophically, I wanted to be able to kind of live in a country that governed itself, and an outward-looking country that is all about trade and is all about the international community itself, but fundamentally has sovereignty. That really hasn't happened. And when something doesn't happen, and something that is very important to so many people, when that is taken away, and when we are gaslighted about that, yes, of course, it becomes massively emotional, and it becomes a vehicle for other things. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing Brexit as this emotional, this car that takes us somewhere else and allows us to talk about other things.
In terms of what you were talking about a second ago in regard to democracy changing and the whole idea of democracy changing and society changing, just develop that thought for us a little bit, Philip, because really, I mean, you can call it what you want, populism, Reform UK, Donald Trump. I mean, the whole paradigm of politics is shifting, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think and again, Brexit is probably at the centre of that. So over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the British public have constantly said that they are frightened of mass immigration. I don't think this is about bigotry. I don't think it's about racism. It's certainly not about immigration per se. It's about the lack of control, and constantly, certainly the Tory government have a lot to answer for here. But you know, and now obviously the Labour government, they are just completely ignoring the British people. So I think there's a crisis in democracy. There was a poll just this week, which you might have seen, Peter, which said something like over 40% of young people would like a dictator.
I did see that. Yeah, it was very concerning. I just thought there are just so many people who don't feel democracy is working for them that their voice just isn't heard.
Well, it's over 40% of young people, but probably more alarming is that, you know, there was 35% of people, you know, from 35 to 45 as well. So this isn't just young people who have grown up in the midst of crisis. This isn't just young people with young ideas who are flown by revolution. This is a great swathe of the country who are completely alienated or look to different models. And we're not actually, I think for most of these people, we're not talking about Donald Trump, and we're not talking about freedom of speech, and we're not talking about controlling DIE, all of those things. I think we're talking about a Stalin-esque dictator. I think we're talking about all of these woke ideas which have closed down freedom of speech, and that's the thing that's really, really frightening. So if you put together a couple of things, if you put together what people are learning in schools and universities, if you put together the massive demographic change that comes with a complete shift in culture, if you talk about the balkanization of the country, people are frightened, people are retreating, people are saying, well, you can't have democracy when all of these factors play. And in some ways it's understandable, but it's incredibly concerning. And this is why we have to deal with the key issues. We have to look at actually what's happening. And we don't do that. We look to other things. We look to symbols, as I say, and we deal with emotion rather than facts, statistics, and what's going on.
And politics all often is and is increasingly an emotional process. I totally agree with what you're saying there, Philip. It's really interesting as well. Let's talk about one of the personalities who a lot of people may not have heard of necessarily. This is Richard Hermer, Lord Hermer, who has talked about his support for EU law, and he's been criticised, saying that undermines border reforms. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Richard Hermer. He's a big mate of Keir Starmer. They worked together previously. They've been lawyers together. And I, for one, am pretty concerned. I mean, he represented Gerry Adams previously. He's been involved in some of the representation around Shamima Begum. And also, you know, some of his pro-Palestinian views are things that I would be very concerned about as well. But he's a very, very, very powerful figure as Attorney General within the government, and has been criticised for being so in the last day or two as well.
Yeah, he's a very shadowy figure, mainly because he was parachuted in by Keir Starmer. It's almost as though he's completely sidestepped all of the democratic processes.
Justice for Emily Thornberry, that's what I say. I mean, I think I'm probably the first person who's ever said that.
Yeah, well, it's a first on this show, certainly. So all of the things we're talking about, he's a really good representation of all of them. Okay, so you've talked about his enthusiasm for Palestine. He is that kind of most forlorn of creatures, a human rights lawyer. He's best mates with Keir Starmer. You've already talked about his representation of Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, and the ramifications of that are staggering in the sense that Gerry Adams might well be receiving compensation for the 1970s.
But of course, Philip, Gerry Adams was never a member of the IRA. We believe you, Gerry.
Yes, I'm not saying yes, the political wing. So all of these things are working against fundamentally the zeitgeist, the feeling of the country. You put the technocracy, the human rights obsession, the EU focus against the burgeoning populism of reform, for example, and you see an absolute clash of ideologies. You see a clash of philosophy, and it's almost as though Keir Starmer and the figure of Richard Hermer in particular, they're almost like an occupying power. They're almost, it's like a fifth column. They're
legitimately, of course. I mean, Keir Starmer is democratically elected.
Yes, he's democratically elected, and of course I'm not saying he's not.
No, sure.
It just feels to me that Richard Hermer in particular signals something that's really sinister that's happened. And it's this pushing of an agenda no matter what. And we've had enough of that in the past, but this is now going on steroids. Because the one thing about the Tories, they weren't ideological. They just wanted to stay in power. It was just about the preservation of power. With Labour, it's about that, but it's also ideology on steroids. It's an ideology that benefits everybody else apart from the British people.
Really interesting talking to you, Philip, as always. Philip Kisley there, who is a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum. I always learn something when I talk to Philip. He's a great guy. Thank you to Connor, who says, I'm sorry, I read that out earlier. Neil says, Cardi P, I keep hearing that Brexit didn't happen. Can someone give me an example of how we're still in the EU? Now, has Brexit been maximised? Then clearly the answer is no. This person says, even now, instead of taking the bull by the horns for independence, all they want is Europe. Leslie says, why is the sickness benefits higher than statutory sick benefit when going sick at work? Alan Zachrison says, hi Peter, why can't we do something similar to Trump and collectively with our European neighbours return illegal immigrants to their country of birth? We'll be talking about Trump very, very shortly in this programme. And Ian in New York says another question would be how Brexit worked or not worked for the EU. Apparently most EU countries are also having issues with financial and immigration woes. Well, we heard about that a little bit earlier in regard to Germany. We had a voice note from Germany, and if you want to get in touch, please do so. 0344 499 1000. Plenty of time before now and 12:30 to get in touch, and we'll take as many calls as we can. We'll also be talking in just a second, I'm looking forward to this discussion, about navigating family conflicts and political differences. How do you do it? Let me know. 0344 499 1000. We're also asking the question today, of course, how has Brexit worked for you? Let me know and stay with me here on Talk.
as government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear, will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks to everybody who's been in touch, just been looking at my tweets there during the break. And Wirelass says, I didn't vote for Brexit for personal gain, but for the good of my country. Rufus says, Germany has 25% of kids going to university, UK at 56%. We don't need to force kids to stay in school till 18. Get apprenticeships and college skills. Couldn't agree more. Bob says, many people voted to leave to control borders, although much of that was because of Eastern European immigration. Mass immigration from further afield shows the governments, Tory and Labour, were unwilling to carry out promises. Wendy says, morning Peter, lovely to have you back. During the pandemic, Matt Hancock said, let's frighten the pants off people. Now they wonder why there has been a rise in mental health sufferers claiming benefits. Well, Wendy, that's a very, very good point. We're asking the big question today, how has Brexit worked for you? Let me know your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. We're also talking now, as you know, on my show, the little catchphrase, some of you love it, some of you hate it, let's disagree without being disagreeable. I was fascinated by the next story. Dana Kasparin is a conflict engagement specialist. Maybe I'm one of those as well. She's a best-selling author, TEDx speaker, award-winning performing artist who works with individuals, organisations and communities worldwide as a trainer, coach, consultant and dialogue designer, drawing on the knowledge and insight gained from her experience and training as a mediator and conflict analyst, as well as her 40-year career as a performing arts innovator. Dana empowers people and organisations to navigate complex and challenging situations. I'm wondering if we can pick up a few tips here, Dana, because navigating family conflicts, perhaps about a month ago during Christmas time, not the easiest of things to do. How do you attack this? How do you go into a situation and say, right, we're going to all disagree agreeably?
Yeah, thank you for that. So one thing is to begin with yourself. Instead of jumping in and saying what's wrong with the other person, what they should be thinking, start with where you're experiencing, what you're feeling, what you care about, and then inquire what the other person cares about as well. So oftentimes we get stuck up on this level of strategies of what should happen, this should happen, no, this should happen. And we never really find out what people care about. And everybody in a conflict is in there because they care about something. So when the conversation can shift down to that level, then we have a much better chance of opening up new possibilities around, okay, what might it look like if we found a way forward?
Do you think people want to compromise, though? There are a lot of people who just say, this is my view, this is the way things are. I'm not really interested in hearing from other people.
Yeah, so for me, I think compromise is not a great solution because then nobody ends up happy. What can happen in a situation where someone is not interested in talking is, first of all, you approach them and say, hey, you know, I've noticed that we have this tension around this issue, and I'm finding it kind of uncomfortable. I'm just wondering how it's going for you. And I would be really interested to talk about this and think about how we could find a way forward that would feel good for both of us. So instead of coming at it with you saying what your solution is, to say, what would it look like for both of us if this felt better, this situation? So a lot of times people who say, I don't want to hear your side of it, are worried about you coming at them. So if they start to get the sense that you're actually opening up more possibility, they're much more likely to be like, all right, let's try talking about this.
Tell us the difference between requests and demands. I was quite interested in this.
Yeah. So a demand is something, if I say to you, okay, this is what you have to do. And if you don't do it, you've either rejected me or you're complying if you do it. A request is something where I say, hey, here's what's going on for me. Here's what's important to me. This is what I'm wondering if we could do. How would that be for you? And then if you say no, it's not you rejecting me. It's you saying, that doesn't work for me, which is more information. And then I can say, okay, so what would it look like if it did work for you? So we can start to unfold these things a little more, because a lot of times those conflicts feel like stuck balls, when in fact they can really separate, so we can start to understand that there's more possibility in there than we had seen originally.
There are a lot of power dynamics, especially when it comes to families and so on. You know, I'm older, therefore how can you challenge me because I know better, because I'm older, or I'm more experienced than you, or you're just not someone who has a lot of experience of the world. How do we deal with this intergenerationally as well in terms of conflict, especially within families, and especially when there are other dynamics at play, not just in terms of opinions in a different argument, but also, well, you know, I'm the person who goes out to work every day to put food on the table, and you're not. You're a 17-year-old kid who's in school.
Yeah. So one really valuable thing can be to differentiate between acknowledgement and agreement. A lot of times we skip over acknowledgement because it feels like we're giving in to the person. So if there's a power change, you can move up to the person who's in power and say, hey, acknowledge what they're saying. So it sounds like for you, it's really important that I get a job or whatever their concern is. And you can hold it together with your interests. So rather than pushing your interest and rejecting theirs, acknowledging what they're thinking is a way of showing respect and also creating something that's between you that says, okay, it sounds like you're thinking this. Here's what I'm thinking. What is the question between us? What are we trying to figure out? And how does what you care about fit into that? So that you're, again, not pushing your own agenda.
How do you tell someone they're just wrong?
Well, the thing is that telling someone they're just wrong doesn't really get you very far. The question is, what is your goal behind telling them that they're wrong? So if you just fundamentally disagree with someone politically, for example, you can say that I fundamentally disagree with you, and here's why.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, certainly in America, certainly in here in the UK as well, there are lots of times when there are really, really big difference and much more binary arguments as well. Things like Brexit, we've been talking about, it's 5 years old. Trump versus Harris are two very, very different candidates, and the whole direction of the country in America is something that a lot of people feel very, very strongly about. I just wonder if you're coming from not just, I don't appreciate your argument, but also I don't understand your argument. How can you sort of go from that binary position to actually saying, actually, I'm going to listen to you a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a great point. So oftentimes we get into those binary arguments, and what we can do is step back and change our own mindset about what this conversation is about, and ask, okay, so what are your experiences that have led you to where you are right now? How did you get to what you believe and understand? So if you're asking that with real curiosity as opposed to as a trick, because people can tell if you're coming at them with a trick. If you're really saying, hey, I want to better understand what you're thinking around this, because right now it doesn't make sense to me, but I'd like to understand. What have you experienced? What have you lived? And then you can also share what you've lived and experienced and how you got to where you are. And that already changes the landscape that you're talking about together. So then you're not talking about Brexit, you're talking about what you care about, what you've lived, what you're worried about, what you want to see for the future.
Thank you so much. Really interesting to talk to you, Dana Kasperin there. Disagreeing without being disagreeable. It's something that we do on this show, certainly. We're going to do more of that. We're going to talk about Trump imposing tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, China, and also on the EU as well. That's something he's been talking about. He's threatening the trade war with them. He's also combatively blamed diversity policies after that air tragedy between the Black Hawk and the passenger plane that was happening. We'll take more of your calls, texts and tweets as well. Get them in. Use the news break to do that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 7222 the word talk in your text, or tweet me at talkTV. I'll have a look at the tweets during the break as well. But we've got Greg Swenson and Matthew Bryza coming up in just a second to talk American politics, so stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, and what a couple of weeks it has been for President Trump. Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas is recently back from America. He was there for the inauguration. We'll get the thoughts of him and Matthew Bryza, former White House and senior State Department official, on the last couple of weeks, and the fact that Donald Trump is talking about imposing tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico and China. We will also be talking about the EU and what his policy towards us will be, and his thoughts on that air tragedy from which there have been no survivors. We'll get your calls, texts and tweets as well in before 12:30 when we hand over to Talk Sport. Stay with us here on Talk. And you can get your call in 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 722 with the word Talk in your text, or tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note. We've had plenty of those this morning. We can have some more of them before the end of the show if you like. 0344 499 1000. That's also the number for text messages via WhatsApp, and the number to give me a ring as well. Greg, great to have you in the studio. Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas. Matthew Bryza is also with us. Greg, what was it like in Washington?
God, really great time. Just an electric energy right now in Washington. You had so many people converging on the city for the inauguration, and real economic optimism too. There's big business community that sort of piled on Washington. So it wasn't just politicians and real political junkies. It was just good business people from around the country. So there's just a really great amount of optimism right now.
Matthew Bryza, I wonder what you make of what Trump has done over the last couple of weeks. He's taken some risks as well as rewarding some of his backers and doing many of the things that he promised to do, certainly in his campaign. Do you think this tariffs that he's threatening to impose on Canada, China and Mexico, do you think that's a good policy? Do you think that will work?
Well, it's debated, right, heavily. What is the impact of tariffs? Is it inflationary, or do adjustments happen in the economy once tariffs are imposed that reduce the inflationary impact of tariffs? But there is a contradiction, right? I mean, kind of conventional economic theory is that tariffs will increase prices. That means boost inflation, which is contradictory to one of President Trump's fundamental goals. Although he has said lately that fighting inflation is now a secondary objective, and securing the U.S. southern border, or both borders, is a primary objective. But having said that, I mean, it's a radical departure from traditional U.S. foreign policy, not only in terms of favoring free trade, but in imposing tariffs on your neighbors that are among the biggest trading partners with whom the U.S. has a free trade agreement, not to mention European allies. So it's very risky geopolitically and economically, but he's confident it's going to have an impact that benefits the U.S.
Greg, what do you think? You're nodding along to a lot of what Matthew was saying there. There's a lot of sense spoken there.
Yeah, Matthew has some good points. I mean, especially on the Republican side, it's been traditionally the party of free trade, and tariffs and sort of more nationalist economic policies was more associated with the Democrats. But like a lot of things, everything's changed, and President Trump is provocative. I think he's actually used tariffs quite wisely as a bargaining chip, and it's worked already. It worked with Mexico back in his first term with the Remain in Mexico policy on illegal migrants, and then you saw him use it against the threat of tariffs against the president of Colombia last week when he declined to accept the return of his illegal migrants into Colombia. So it's unpredictable, and markets typically they don't like unpredictable. They like certainty, right? Yeah. And so I think this is new, but there's a lot of things that are new about President Trump, and even versus his first term. So I don't...
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it took perhaps a little while to get going in the first term, but he knows this now. He knows what he's doing. And really, as we saw from all those executive orders on day one, there's so much that he's done already. He's done probably more than Biden did in the last year.
Absolutely. That's not saying much, but but I think, and the things that Biden did accomplish were quite destructive to the country. Notably the big spending bills, the Save America plan or act, and then and the Inflation Reduction Act. So you know, look, he's hit the ground running. It's a great point, Peter. He had more time to prepare. Essentially, he's had 4 years to prepare for this, and so he's really hit the ground running. It's great to see, and again, I think the optimism just comes through from all his actions.
One of the big challenges, Matthew, certainly in the last few days, has been the response to this horrendous helicopter plane, the passenger plane crash. It was interesting. We saw a little bit of the press conference on Drive I was presenting on Thursday, and he said that he was obviously consoling people and saying that he and Melania and obviously 340 million Americans were thinking about the people who had died. But he also said that he talked about diversity, equity and inclusion, and said that could perhaps have been part of this. I wonder how that has gone down, Matthew, and what you think about the fact that this was raised.
Yeah, it's sort of, I know, it's kind of tempering the optimism that's really out there that Greg was talking about, especially in the business community. I mean, you know, it's considered across the board, regardless of your political affiliation, wise to withhold any speculation about the cause of a tragedy like this until the experts investigate. And so, you know, the investigation is just beginning. It's going to be conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board, part of the Federal Aviation Administration. And yeah, it's unprecedented in my experience that a president would speculate on any of the causes before having a sense of what it may be. And, you know, there hasn't been any, by his own admission, by President Trump's own admission, there hasn't been any evidence that DEI was involved. I mean, he said in the Oval Office yesterday or the day before, when asked point blank by a reporter, do you have evidence of that? He said, no, but it's, you know, essentially said it's possible that DEI was involved. So his actions have been incredible, as Greg was saying. He's done more, and as you were saying, Peter, in these 2 weeks than you know, so much of the Biden administration. But these sorts of, you know, shoot from the hip kind of emotional outbursts, I think, are going to hurt him in the longer run.
Do you think they'll hurt him in the longer run? We've had the American Association of People with Disabilities saying that Trump's comments were irresponsible, disparaging and wrong.
No, I don't agree with that at all. In fact, before the crash, January 22nd, I believe, one of his executive actions was to remove DEI from selection criteria in the Federal Aviation, whatever it's called, the
authority. I think.
Yeah, thank you. But also specifically for air traffic controllers. Mm-hmm. And you know, during the Obama years, there were 1,000 candidates, and out of the 1,000, 900 ended up doing a class action lawsuit that were removed from their candidacy because there wasn't, in terms of the administration's view, enough diversity.
Right.
And it's something in public safety like that. It's really important to keep that away. Mm-hmm. So it's been a big theme of President Trump outside of the whole of the news from Washington on the crash. So I'm not sure it will hurt him in the long run. He is provocative. He likes to, as Matthew said, shoot from the hip. That's just his nature. People were really uncomfortable with that in 2015 and 16. I think most of us get it now, and that's just the way he is, and it's refreshing. It's unfiltered, and that's often quite refreshing.
Matthew, we heard from Pete Hesketh, we heard from J.D. Vance as well. This is clearly not just all about Donald Trump. There's a collective nature to this presidency. Do you think that will continue? And I wonder what you make of the role of Elon Musk so far.
I definitely think it will continue. The Republican Party is the party of Donald J. Trump. And whereas he was not, I don't think he was expecting to win in the election previously in 2016. This time, you guys were saying he is totally ready. He had a plan, you know, coming into, formulation that he's implementing now. And he is the boss. So Pete Hegseth and everybody else, they're taking orders from him. And they're going to, if they want to keep their jobs, they're going to have to keep on doing that.
What do you make, Greg, of this sort of international aspect of it, especially in regard to the EU and these tariffs? I mean, we've heard about Canada, Mexico and China certainly, but specifically the EU and perhaps Britain as well. How do you see this developing as time goes on?
Yeah, I think it will be perhaps not as bad as the critics think. And you notice that in his inauguration speech, he really dialed it down. He was very firm on a lot of the policies that he's been telegraphing for months, you know, during the campaign and the transition. That was the one area where he alluded to it, but I think he was using it again more as a bargaining chip, and I think that's what we can expect to see. 30% of Mexico, in terms of exports, from Mexico, that's 30% of their GDP. For Canada, it's just over 20% of their GDP. For America, with those two countries, it's less than 1% of GDP. So that's a strength that he has, and it's a tool he can use. Again, it worked in his first term with Mexico, and this fentanyl problem, this sex trafficking across the border, especially the Mexican border, but some of which comes from the Canadian border. These are really big issues. So I think so much of what he's doing, whether it's tariffs or any other policy, is going to be around the illegal migrant crisis.
And that certainly is the priority, Matthew Bryce, isn't it? And I wonder what you see happening next in all of that.
Oh, it's definitely the priority. And as I said a few moments ago, he kind of recalibrated his post-election message to say it's more important to secure the southern border and northern border than to bring down prices. So, I mean, he's already beginning to implement with a big splash the policy of rounding up illegal or undocumented migrants. I think there's going to be a struggle, though, in terms of funding, and so that's a political struggle in the Congress, right? Because the money and the personnel and the facilities don't exist to reach the higher end of the objectives in terms of deporting undocumented immigrants. We just don't have enough detention spaces. They're talking about building 40,000 new beds, but then you need, the money for the transportation and for the personnel from ICE to carry out these actions. So there will be a battle in the Congress, and there are, real budgetary hawks in Trump's own Republican Party who are really worried about excessive spending and the national debt. So it just, as a practical, even logistical matter, remains to be seen how close Trump is going to get to the 2 million or even the 11 million he talked about undocumented migrants or immigrants that are in the United States being deported.
And those battles ahead with Congress will certainly loom large, won't they, Greg?
Absolutely. I think now the hard work starts, right? Executive orders are easy.
Yeah.
And the staffers, were very well prepared, and I think the president was well prepared. Congress is going to be difficult. The Republicans don't have a slim majority, so if there's any pushback from even a handful of, 4 or 5, that can really threaten, the ability of the president to get his agenda completed. So, and I think, and Matthew brings up a good point, I think there's a lot of congressmen that are worried about spending. The capacity for deportations last week was only 400,000. With some more resources, they can get that up to 600,000. So that's why we're starting, that you hear the term the worst first.
Yeah.
It's really, mostly
and
violent
it's a process,
criminals.
isn't it?
Yeah. It takes some time, but I think, and if it's communicated properly, people will understand that keeping the illegal migrants can be as expensive as deporting them, because they're being housed, much like here, they're being housed, they're given mobile phones and debit cards, and it's really expensive, and it's really wrecking cities like New York and Chicago, where I'm from. So I think voters will understand that it's going to be costly.
Greg, thank you. That's Greg Swenson there, the chairman of Republicans Overseas. And thank you to Matthew Bryce as well, who's a former White House and senior State Department official. Kevin Mears in Shropshire has been in touch to say, Peter, historically tariffs were the only taxation in America. Income tax was introduced as a temporary measure to pay for wars for short periods until no longer needed. After doing this quite a few times, they realised they could keep it permanent, as not many people moaned. The moral of the story is, don't give government an inch and they will always take advantage. So what Trump is doing by imposing tariffs on imports is a return to the better way. The elite establishment just don't like it, says Kev. Well, thank you very much indeed for that, and keep your comments coming in. We've got a little bit longer to hear your calls, texts and tweets. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Conservatives wouldn't help me. I thought the Labour government would help me, but it doesn't seem like they are going to.
Right.
I tried to take it through the court system. I've tried to launch an independent police complaint, which has just been completely ignored. It's like nobody wants to find out what went wrong, and I'm just asking why. What is it that happened that we aren't allowed to know as a family?
Right.
Everybody wants to say that my dad was their friend,
Yeah.
but if you have a friend that was tragically killed like this, wouldn't you stand up for him and do what is right and fight for him? Because that is what he would do for them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Ian, who says, how can Brexit work when it's controlled by Remainers? Love to know what the proportion of Remainers leavers is out of the 650 MPs. Another person says, it's not hard to see why anyone with the head for business is fleeing the UK when we have practitioners of constructive criticism. These people are the sign of a dying culture and low productivity, guaranteed if you hire one. I'd quit within 30 seconds of listening to her nonsense. Wow. Tell us what you really think. Penny says, I always say, let's agree to disagree agreeably, but some people still don't listen. A male friend of mine fell out with me because he hates Trump and I don't. His loss, says Penny in Essex. Penny, honestly, it's so sad when that happens. It's like, let's face it, neither of you is likely to meet Donald Trump. Maybe you will someday, I don't know, but it's unlikely. And then it's like, oh well, we're just going to fall out because of that. It's crazy. Let's just keep talking. Let's just keep talking. And indeed, I will be keeping talking because in a few minutes' time you have a choice whether you stick with the radio, and we're heading over to Talk Sport because we'll get exclusive live commentary of Nottingham Forest versus Brighton in the Premier League. But also, if you stick with the visuals on YouTube and on your smart TV and so on, there'll be all sorts of programmes. Grumpy Old Men at 12:30, Plank of the Week at 1 o'clock, What Just Happened at 2 o'clock, and Clash of the Titans, in which I am taking part at 3 o'clock. I am one of the Titans this week. I think they possibly ran out of Titans. Right then, let's talk to Tarquin in London. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Tarquin, what do you make of Brexit?
Cardi P, how you doing, sir?
All right, all the better for talking to you, Tarquin. What's going on?
I love the way you said China. You should do
China.
That was Donald. Yeah,
China.
Yeah. It's brilliant, that.
Don't encourage me.
You know. What other phrases do you know?
I can't really do any other Donald Trump. I can do a little bit of Andy Murray though as well. A little bit of Andy Murray.
Ooh, missus. Yeah, you have. Joking aside, yeah, I think the thing was about Brexit is that we're all going on about, oh, you know, did we get it? What was it like? How was it for you? And all that sort of, let's have a cigarette. It was more to do with, for me, it showed that we just don't have democracy. It was a fig leaf on democracy that Cameron pulled out of his back pocket and said, oh, let's do this for the wavering Tories. It completely backfired. The whole show then shebang got exposed that, oh my God, this fig leaf, this fallacy of democracy has been exposed. We don't have it. We're all slaves.
Do you not think things have changed a little bit? I mean, we've legally left the EU, haven't we, Tarquin?
Now, that's just fig leaf, master of puppet stuff, Peter. It's all just... The City of London rule everything. We know that. Well, most people didn't know. I didn't know till quite recently. The City of London isn't even part of the United Kingdom. It's its own city-state.
Sort of, but yes.
Control all the purse strings. We're just slaves. It's just we just got to accept the fact that we're stuck with it.
Goodness me. Well, maybe I'll brighten your day by doing a little dancing to YMCA. Maybe you could do that. Do the Trump dancing to YMCA.
Yes,
I don't know. Yeah, Tarquin, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you, Tarquin in London there. And a emollient and ebullient character. Robert is in Hertfordshire. He's giving me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Robert, you're the last call for me today. It's great to talk to you. What would you like to say?
Well, I'm a Brexiteer, but we were sold a dream. It was pie in the sky. The alarm bell should have been ringing the very next day after Brexit, when the Prime Minister resigned. I mean, that tells you a lot. Then from then on, we was ridiculed on certain radio stations, certain presenters called Brexiteers racist and ignorant. It didn't happen because it wasn't allowed to happen. I mean, you had the Speaker, John Bercow, who should be impartial. He was actively against Brexit. I mean,
correct.
You know, that should have happened. And then you've got to listen. There was a lot of. It's all about greed. There was a lot of people who got put out of pocket. Look at the Kinnock family. They was all employed by the EU. I think.
Well, some of them were. There's certainly commissioners and all the rest of it. Yeah, with Neil Kinnock and a lot of people's pensions happy with. Do you think anything has got better in the last 5 years because of Brexit?
No.
Okay.
I don't. The thing is, it's about acceptance. They should have accepted it, the Remainers, and got on with it. It's like, you know, a lot of us don't accept that the Labour Party won the, won
the election, but we get on with it. We live our lives, don't we? Don't we, Robert? Yeah.
You know.
Robert, thanks for your thoughts. Really appreciate that. That's Robert in Hertfordshire. There, appreciate him getting in touch on 0344 499 1000. I'd also like to say thank you to Chris Jacobs, the producer, Tommy Bates, and the assistant producer, Dave Rhodes, the technical operator, Titus D'Souza and Davis Fang have been the visual producers. Ayabel Farah is the video editor today, and the weekend editor has been Dean Spencer. So big thanks to all of them. As I say, Nottingham Forest versus Brighton in the Premier League coming up in just a second. Then from 2:30, Adrian Durham, Troy Deeney and Dean Ashton will take you around the grounds on game day. They'll bring the goals as they go in from the Premier League and EFL. And then at 5:30 on the radio, Jamie O'Hara and Jason Cundy take your calls on game day phone in. And if you stick with the visuals, whether that's on your smart TV or on YouTube, you can get all sorts of programmes, including Clash of the Titans at 3 o'clock with me. I am one of the Titans this week. I'll be back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I will see you then. Thanks for tuning in.
Peter Cardwell at the weekend on Talk.